Good evening. I don't think this is this working? Yeah, this is. Don't let the title of sales scare anybody off, okay? This is GitHub sales, so it's very soft and cozy and enveloping and nice and warm. It's not a harsh environment, certainly. Stupid question. Can I have a show of hands for the people that class themselves as technical in this room? Yeah, pretty much everybody, okay. And what about uber technical, right? So big yourself up. Come on, there's got to be more than half a dozen of you, right? I've seen you all at lunch, right? Okay, well, I think it's probably safe to say I won't be teaching you much that you don't already know or have suspected in your jobs. I think if we were going to put a management summary together on this presentation, it would be InnerSourcing is about culture change, right? One further question before we crack in. Who's actually familiar with the term of InnerSourcing? Okay, well, there's at least 4 people that we can just... you and I must just go off to the pub now and we can leave the rest of them to make it up as they go along. So, all businesses will evolve into software businesses. I think this is probably a nicer way of positioning Mark Andreessen's assertion that software is eating the world. In my experience, the typical UK organisation isn't comfortable with the notion of being eaten by anything, let alone software. But it is fair to say that most of the companies that you guys represent, guys and girls, represent are on a journey, right? One that takes us from a place where we once used to use and consume software to one where we're actually, creating it, investing in the people and tools and processes that surround it. Great case in point, the UK retail banking sector. Most of these guys now regard themselves as technology shops with banking licenses. And if your bosses and the powers that be back in your work require further proof of this shift, do we need to remind them of the Uber story? Of course, every organisation has a choice whether it evolves or doesn't. And as we've seen here in the UK with the retail people on the high street, failure to evolve and adapt can often lead you to finding yourself sat on the curbside, scratching your head, saying, what the hell just happened there? So, whilst open source has been around for many, many years, I think it's probably fair to say that it's truly erupted in the last 10 years to become what I would term proper mainstream. Moreover, it's evolved to become validated as the most efficient way and manner of developing software. Examples that have reached common lexicon range from the ramp stack to Linux operating system, Hadoop, Swift, Go. All of these are maintained by huge open source communities. Open source enables software to be built faster, respond to security and market impacts more quickly, and provide better and more robust products as a result. It only seems like yesterday when an old boss of mine was found to be saying, free software ain't good and good software ain't free. If I had my phone on me, I could show you photographs of him on the golf course, happily in retirement. The good news is he's worked 4 shots off his handicap. So we can probably all safely acknowledge that open source is here to stay and has his or her legs firmly planted under your organisation's kitchen table. The models and practices that have evolved in the open source world have officially been validated as the way to build software today. I think I'd like to guess that we already know the answer to this question. Spoiler alert, it's the methodologies that we've learnt in open source. And the smart companies that certainly we're working with and hopefully that you represent today are the ones that have adapted these same models internally so that they can replicate the success of open source internally. PayPal, being a great example, is one of the first organisations to phrase the term inner source. Where did they start? Well, by studying and internalising some of the core tenets of open source best practice. Namely, we need cross-functional collaboration between developers and across teams. transparency, both of code and the decisions that led to that code being changed in the first place. A sense of community and mentorship. This is the difficult one, right? And we'll come back to it. And then rapid prototyping and data-driven iteration around those prototypes. With these four things, we've found they're common to most of the companies that have adopted the inner sourcing way of working. But you don't have to take just our word for it, right? Look at what your peers are doing in other companies. By the way, there is, for those of you who are interested, a great book by PayPal on the subject. It's an O'Reilly electronic publication. And if you just Google getting started with InnerSource and PayPal, that'll come up. So let's have a look at what these guys find in common, right, with their inner sourcing initiatives. So I guess I've got my 10 commandments here, and you can genuinely take notes at this point. So commandment number 1, code is shared with a wide audience rather than just a few members and a leadership chain. Right, with wider collaboration comes much higher reuse and discoverability of code. But here's the rub, right? Contributors have got to feel empowered and free to comment. They've got to feel free to raise those issues and submit pull requests, regardless of their rank, their pay grade, their time spent with the company, or indeed who they sit next to in the lunch queue. This is a pretty fundamental cultural shift for any organisation, let alone for a nation like the UK, who's only recently abandoned the idea of the bowler hat in the city, right? The notion of individual empowerment tends to be the biggest blocker for any company embarking on an inner sourcing initiative. In the companies where we have seen it work really well, they've needed the support and sponsorship from the highest levels of management in order to nudge, some might say push, I would choose nudge, the need for change in the mindset down through the ranks. Tenet number 2, anyone can start a discussion, report a bug, giving transparent feedback, and ask for features in an open and transparent manner. 3, branches and forks can be made freely. This doesn't mean that every branch is going to be committed back into master. Rules still apply, just as they do in the open source world. This is why we called it a pull request. Commandment number 4, code can be worked on by anyone in the world at any time. And a lot of enterprises that I work with start to scratch their head at this point. Right? 5, communication takes place asynchronously, is written down alongside code. That code and commentary are widely available, thereby encouraging reuse and enhancing documentation. 6, ideally testing is implemented as a key programming task to protect against failures. This usually takes place as part of a CI. 7, similar to open source, everyone can and often does participate in software development. Everyone is invited to contribute. Notice I choose the term invite rather than expect. By inviting you to contribute as a member of the team, I quickly foster the notion of the fact that you're giving to get and vice versa. Number 8, the internal community will include both core and non-core code contributors who want to help advance or learn or have an interest in this project. Number 9, all decisions are discussed publicly, are stored indefinitely, and can be searched and referenced later on. Has huge potential for reducing time to money of new developers. And number 10, and here's another one that's difficult for your boss to swallow, the community itself determines how to go about its work and the right workflow for specific situations. A successful inner source community is enabled by participation in open source. Discuss. It's like a question from a future exam in computer studies in the UK. Well, I think we all understand that building scalable software quickly gives a company competitive advantage. But the key here is that leveraging the full energy, brain power, and skills of a community of developers both inside and outside your organization is going to enable you to get there much, much faster. But we also know that providing familiar tools, a supportive community, and access to prior art. Notice I'm using the term art. Anybody that writes code in this room now is an artist, according to GitHub, and not a software engineer. With these three things, we've seen genuine culture change, which leads to happier and more productive teams. Again, proof positive, if we reference a chap by the name of Jeremy King from Walmart, and I quote, the more we do this internal inner source, the more flexible we can become and the faster, sorry, this is open source, the more flexible we can become and the faster we can release code to customers. He goes on to say, we want you to consume open source because it's faster, cheaper, and better, but we want you to contribute because it's the right thing for you to do in the community. GitHub helps you do this, right? Modern software development practices come from open source, and these are our roots. This is where we've come from, and it's where we will continue to thrive and prosper. We built modern social coding, right? And bring that experience to customers and the best practice that came along with those, with the thousands of projects. Dry slide, another list. Open and transparent culture, right? This is vital if we're going to look at inner sourcing to be successful and for it to flourish within an organization. People can't experiment in an environment of mistrust or fear. Collaboration platform. I think we have one. You might want to look into it if you're not already. Support by all the levels of employees. We've touched on the higher ranks here, but everyone has to sign up for this tour of duty, right? Start small, by all means, but make sure you take everybody with you on the journey. Just as in the open source world, no one's standing over your shoulder inspecting your code, right? It's important that we let people learn and contribute autonomously. The best inner sourcing companies, as we've already discussed, are the ones that have taken part and take open source to heart. Yeah, automate the boring stuff, right? It frees you up to do so much more cool shit. The best products, and we have proof here, are built by the most diverse teams. We do have research to prove it. Also, if you were to hang out in any of the GitHub offices where our software engineers live and work, you'd appreciate that we really take this to heart, right? You won't find a more diverse organization than the guys employed at GitHub. Community leadership. This is normally the glue, or the person and the glue, that holds an inner source initiative together, at least in the early days. Which takes us on to this notion of community leadership. It's community leadership in the sense that they're leading a movement within your organization to drive open source and inner source adoption, right? I've yet to come across anyone with the title community leader within an organization. For me, that conjures up some guy in ripped jeans looking after kids in a after-school club. In reality, this role and job description is somebody who takes on board open source and inner source to drive adoption, set the tone and the standard, and most importantly, publish some of this stuff upstairs to the stakeholders who are paying the bills. We've seen community managers with all sorts of job titles, but one thing remains constant. They are all deeply passionate about improving the efficiency of the SDLC in a transparent and open manner. So what should you all have in your shopping list if you're looking to do this inner source thing? Again, a code collaboration platform. I'm undercover here, I have two. A culture of openness and transparency. We've done that to death, I think. It has to be, public reviews within your organisation. There has to be a willingness to accept and review contribution from others. Importantly, we have to teach our fellow developers that it's okay not to know the answer, right? And it's okay to accept that answer from other people. InnerSource has to have support at all levels of management and across functional business units. What we've seen is that well-spirited, well-intentioned call to arms for InnerSource doesn't seem to help in mature organisations. They don't kind of get it. Rather, we've found that a more governed approach with a formal InnerSource incubation process, establishing an InnerSource foundation, these are the initiatives that gain traction the fastest and grow the most successfully. You've got to have project visibility across organisations. If I can't find something, I sure as hell can't reuse it. Full documentation of conversations. Generally, if there isn't a link to a conversation, it didn't take place or it doesn't exist. My friend, and yours as well, I suspect, Beyonce, was keen to point out that if you liked it, you should have put a ring on it. Here at GitHub, we say if you like it, put a URL on it. I think it will sell less in the charts, by the way. We've already discussed this. I think it's again, part of some of these core tenets of your shopping list. Rigorous testing and implementation of CI. This should include static code analysis and code coverage. Why? Should be obvious. Just these two things increase the confidence that contributions that come from your non-core team are going to meet the standards that you've set. Again, banging on about this, use and contribution to open source projects, as this leads to sustained entry into your development communities. This alone should help you attract and retain great developer talent within your companies. And furthermore, it drives developers into this habit of the open source methodology. As with any good regime change, carrots need to be grown, sticks need to be heavy and sharpened at the ends. So we like to look at examples where organisations have got it right, and they do this by introducing an incentive or an advocacy programme for reinforcing InnerSource initiatives. What does this mean? So you encourage people to speak about InnerSource at internal and external conferences. Have internal blog posts about releases, right? Offer incentives to beta testers. You could also consider creating developer goals and metrics around participating in projects other than the ones they do in their day job. We need to create an environment where fear of performing work in public is removed. It should also be aiming to reduce the anxiety around how maintenance work is properly mitigated. It will get done. Create an environment where product managers' fears of losing control or missing performance goals are put to bed. Again, these things have a habit of going away when you do this stuff properly. Here's one for the accountants amongst us. I suspect, are there any accountants in here? I'm safe. Funding models need to be adjusted to accommodate this new way of working, right? Working across profit centre boundaries, should be actively encouraged and indeed rewarded, right? If I'm sat here at my desk and I can't work on your project because you're not going to pay me, that's not going to work. If there are no accountants, I think it's safe to say there's probably no legal folk in here because we probably need to engage them as well. I don't suggest this lightly. You'd never want to hang out with lawyers if you can help it. But they certainly need to okay the fact that you're going to contribute in different functional areas within your business. From nuts and bolts of what you're doing, you've got to be willing to refactor the code base into a contribution-friendly format. So we should be looking to stripe out as much code as possible, reduce it into very small modules with less coupling between them. Oh, apologies. All of these things have a tendency to change the project owner and maintainer. So here was a guy who was just doing a job, going through the motions, right? Rubber stamping stuff as it comes past his desk. it takes it from that burden, if you like, that admin burden, to a role of rewarding leadership with a responsibility for peer review. It will go on to create contribution-friendly environments while maintaining the quality of the system. Plus, this new way of working, release often, collective code ownership, early feedback to stakeholders, test-driven development, focus on automation, aligns really nicely with agile development techniques. For the bosses in the room, you can tick that box if you have that on an MBO. And certainly if we're ticking boxes for MBOs, anything with DevOps on it, we can also tick that box. That's pretty much me. I'm done. There's some additional reading for when the slides get presented. Any questions? Excellent. Off to the pub.
Questions? Why should we do InnerSource? Because now you showed us the recipes, and I think it's super convincing. But maybe what did organizations achieve who went that path down?
I think there's a couple of reasons that I would suggest you do it, and then there are lots of organisations where you can prove that they've done it right. Okay. Why you should do it? I think if you look at how open source has developed particularly over the last 10 years, it's a very, very organic way of writing software.
Yeah.
And that's much more akin to how models grow in nature, as opposed to this stepped release that we've previously done in waterfall and then moving to agile. That's the why. And the who or the where and the validation, I guess, is in organisations like PayPal, IBM, Microsoft. These guys, their core IP is software, and they're adopting and taking on board these principles because they've realised the efficiency gains, which translate into getting product to market earlier and banking cash sooner.
Okay, cool. Some more questions from the audience.
I don't know about a lot of fun. I think it creates more fun. I think it opens up an environment where experimentation is actively encouraged. I think, and I'm thinking about one high street bank in particular, they've taken this very much to heart. And some of the stuff that they're doing that was initially classified as fun, when the bosses come steamrolling through the office and say, what are you working on? And they've said, oh, just this fun thing. That fun thing turns into the next, big thing for the bank, right? It's the next product. It's the next major initiative. So I think it turns it into fun, and those fun things have a habit of driving the business forward. The important stuff still needs to be done, and that's just done more efficiently. But I think the experimentation, should be fun, right? And there should be an element that is reserved, that is, nonsensical, because otherwise what's the point of experimenting? You're never going to learn.
Cool. So, thank you very much, and please give a warm applause to Nigel from GitHub.